Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Fraud, Fact, and Fiction, and today's video I'm going to read and discuss the real story of The Little Mermaid. Now don't worry, I'm not going to read to you page by page, but kind of like doing a YouTube book report, read some and summarize as I go. That way you would know what the book is all about, and you don't have to sit here for a very long time. Also, if you want to read the book for yourself, you can go to a local library and rent it, or go online and rent an ebook version of The Little Mermaid. So before we continue, press the like button, subscribe, and turn on all notifications. The Little Mermaid story is widely known for either the 1989 Disney cartoon or the most recent 2023 live action film, but so many are not aware it was a book way before film was ever invented. And even if there are some that already know there was a book, they don't know what it's all about. The real story, or the book The Little Mermaid, is very dark, somewhat strange, and yet it's a very sad story that totally differs from any of the movies. And like majority of the cases, like usual, the movie is nothing like the book. If you know of any movie that literally is just like the book, then let me know in the comments below. In the year 1837, The Little Mermaid was published and released to the public by a story writer named Hans Christian Andersen. Andersen, who wrote other stories like The Ugly Duckling, The Swineherd, The Emperor's New Clothes, The Little Match Girl, and many others, which inspired many movies to be made after them in the later years, in which The Little Mermaid, being successful, made it to the silver screen twice. So let us begin reading. The book starts out as, far out in the ocean, where the water is blue as the prettiest cornflower and as clear as crystal, it is very, very deep. So deep indeed that no cable can fathom it. Many church steeples piled one upon another could not reach from the ground beneath to the surface of the water above. There dwelt the Sea King and his subjects. Okay, I'm going to stop the reading. Here, the Sea King is mentioned with no name. His name was not King Triton, but only known as the Sea King. Then it mentions the kingdom of the Sea King in its description and detail as a gorgeous underwater castle. I'm going to continue reading. The Sea King had been a widow for many years. His aged mother kept house for him. She was a very, very wise woman, exceedingly proud of her high birth. On that account, she wore 12 oysters on her tail, while others, also of higher rank, were allowed to wear 6. I'm going to stop reading there. Now we know that the Sea King, which had no name, was a widow, meaning a husband whose wife had died and passed on, lived in an underwater mystical castle with his aged mother, with no name, who kept the place for him. Also later on, as you read, it reveals that the Sea King had 6 beautiful daughters, and of course, obviously, they would be the 6 granddaughters of the grandmother as well. The youngest of the 6 daughters or granddaughters was said to be the most beautiful and unusual from the rest, and of course, she had no name. And from the rest of the other sisters, the Little Mermaid was actually very curious and very interested for what was going on above the sea. So in the book, the youngest is known as the Little Mermaid, or the youngest daughter, but her name was not Ariel. That would be the name Disney gave her, but just like her, the other sisters had no name also. And like I mentioned before, the Sea King and grandmother had no name either. Also in the book, there is no Sebastian the crab, no Flounder the fish, or Scuttle the seagull. So as we continue on, these 6 sisters include the youngest, were promised when they reached adulthood. At the age of 15, they were allowed to go up to the surface of the ocean, and whatever they saw and experienced, they would return home and tell about it. Also, by the way, if you're wondering, in the book it mentions the adulthood at age 15. It is because The Little Mermaid was written and published in 1837, a time back then when you did reach the age 15. Yes, you were considered by society an adult, and the age for 18 for adult was not established then. So as each sister, one by one, became 15 years of age, each went to the surface, and whatever they saw and experienced, they went back to the kingdom at the bottom of the sea and told about it. The youngest one, the Little Mermaid, when it was her time for adulthood, at age 15, she went to the surface, and when she did, she had a total different experience than the rest of the sisters. When she reached the surface of the ocean, she spotted a sailing ship. Curious, she pursued it and watched the crew on the vessel as they were all dressed up for a special occasion. And that special occasion would be the royal prince celebrating his 16th birthday. And of course, he had no name. The Little Mermaid saw the prince and, knowing nothing about him, fell in love at first sight. Later, a terrible storm came and rocked the ship violently, eventually breaking the ship till it gave into the waters and began to sink. All the crew members, including the prince, were thrown into the vast sea, and being unconscious, the prince started to sink, only to be rescued and brought to the surface by the youngest mermaid. She eventually brought the prince to a nearby beach and placed him there. Later, several acquaintances were looking for the prince. The youngest mermaid dove back in the water and hid herself behind some boulders. There, she observed the prince getting on his feet and was escorted by his acquaintances to go back home. Upon her return to the castle of the Sea King, her home, when she was asked about her experience at the surface, she said nothing about what she experienced and did. After a while keeping her secret, she could not bear it any longer and finally broke it down to one of her sisters about her saving the prince and her desires. Eventually, the other sisters heard it too. Very soon, it became known to even the friends of the 6 sisters who knew who the prince was and where he lived. And all this information stayed in the group and no one else knew about it. Then the sisters took the youngest sister, the little mermaid, to the surface to show her where the prince lived and his livelihood. After getting insight of his life and the human world, she was exceedingly glad that she saved the life of the prince and became more interested in him and the human world a lot more. But her desires also made her sad at the same time, and the fact she really wanted to be a human and didn't know if it was possible. So she decided to go to her grandmother, who was very wise by many, to ask her some serious questions about humans and the life above the ocean. And the answers she got from her grandmother were rather disappointing and disturbing. And reading here, this is a response from her grandmother. If human beings are not drowned, asked the little mermaid, can they live forever? Do they never die as we do here in the sea? Yes, replied the old lady, the grandmother. They must also die, and their term life is even shorter than ours. We sometimes live to 300 years, but when we cease to exist, here we only become foam on the surface of the water, and we have not even a grave down here of those we love. We have no immortal soul. We should never live again, but like green seaweed, when once it has been cut off, we can never flourish no more. Human beings, on the contrary, have a soul which lives on forever, lives after the body has been turned to dust. It rises up through the clear, pure air beyond the glittering stars. As we rise out of the water and behold all the land of the earth, so do they rise to unknown glorious regions we shall never see. Why have not we have an immortal soul? Asked the little mermaid mournfully. I would give gladly all the hundreds of years that I have to live to be a human being only for one day, and to have the hope of knowing the happiness of the glorious world above the stars. You must not think of that, said the old woman. We feel ourselves to be much happier and much better off than human beings. So I shall die, said the little mermaid, and as the foam of the sea I shall be driven out about, never again to hear the music of the waves, or see the prettiest flowers, nor the red sun. Is there anything I can do to win a mortal soul? No, said the old woman, unless a man were to love you so much that you were more to him than his father and mother, and if all his thoughts and all his love were fixed upon you, and the priest placed his right hand in yours, and he promised to be true to here and after, then his soul will glide into your body, and you will obtain and share in the future happiness of mankind. He will give you a soul to you and retain his own as well, but this can never happen. Your fish's tail, which is considered beautiful, is thought on earth to be quite ugly. They do not know any better. They think it is necessary to have 2 stout props, which they call legs, in order to be handsome. Then the little mermaid sighed and looked sorrowful at her fish's tail. I'm going to stop reading here. So being sad and disappointed, hearing her grandmother's answers, the youngest daughter decided to do the only thing that would help her become human, and that is to make a deal with a sorcerer, a witch, or the sea witch. There was a witch known as the sea witch that lived in a miry marshland far away. The little mermaid decided to make a trip to visit the sea witch so she can become human. So she left the castle of the Sea King, her home, and headed out to visit the sea witch. After a long journey, the youngest daughter finally came to the realm of the sea witch. As she got close, the waters became very shallow and mucky, and rising out of the water, she saw a vast marshland and a house in the far distance, which was made of the bones of wrecked sailors. The sea witch was not named Ursula like the movie portrays, but here in the original book, like everyone else, she had no name. Also, the sea witch was not half woman and half octopus, but the book describes the sea witch as an old hag that lived on the swampy marshland. Humanoid, she was seen having a toad on her shoulder, allowing her to eat from her mouth, and she had these ugly-looking water snakes crawling all over her body as pets, calling them her little chickens. Reading here in the book, it says, "I know what you want," said the sea witch. "It is very stupid of you, but you shall have your way, and it will bring you great sorrow, my pretty princess. You want to get rid of your vicious tail, and to have two supports instead of it, like human beings on earth, so that the young prince may fall in love with you, and that you may have an immortal soul." And then the witch laughed so loud and disgustingly that the toad and the snakes fell to the ground and lay there and wiggled about. So I'm going to stop it there. So the witch said that she could make her human by creating a potion for the little mermaid to drink in exchange for a voice. Then after the mermaid agreed, the witch put a cauldron on the fire and started making the potion. She threw in a lot of strange and disgusting ingredients for the potion, including cutting herself and secreting her own blood, which was black in color, into the potion. Once the sea witch was done with the potion, she went over to the mermaid and removed her ability to sing and speak by cutting out her tongue. Then the sea witch told the youngest mermaid she had to make the prince truly love her and marry her in order to obtain an eternal soul. If the prince marries another woman instead of her, the morning after, she would die and turn into sea foam. After that painful and agonizing experience, the little mermaid was mute and then took the potion and departed the realm of the sea witch. After departing the realm of the sea witch, the little mermaid briefly went back home while everyone was asleep and never said her goodbyes to anyone and never told anyone about her deal with the sea witch. While she was there, she went to her favorite garden, grabbed a flower, and then left and went up to the surface to the palace of the prince. When she arrived at the domain of the prince, she came to some marble steps that came from the palace to the water's edge. There she sat at a lower portion of the steps, drank the potion, and fainted. When she awoke, she was naked. She felt sharp pains at a low portion of her body. Looking down, she saw her fish's tail have already been transformed into a pair of human legs. Gazing at her new given legs, she happened to turn to the side, and there before her stood the prince. He was shocked and confused at what he found near the waterline, so he asked her name and where she came from. And she could not answer him, for her ability to speak was removed. Realizing she was mute and homeless, the young prince brought her in and gave her the care that she needed. Later, she was clothed, and the prince took her around the palace and showed her the place. Then he gave her a room to stay and told her she could stay here as long as she wanted. The little mermaid was happy and joyful that she was off on a good start, but at the same time, she was concerned about winning the affection of the prince, because like the sea witch stated, he had to marry her to obtain an eternal soul. But if he marries another woman, then the following morning she would die and dissolve into sea foam. And unlike the Disney movie, in the book, there was no specific time frame that the mermaid had to get the prince to marry her. Time passes as the mermaid and the prince becomes close friends. She even started going places with him, attending banquets, and even dancing with the prince. And reading here, the book says he had a page's dress made for her, that she might accompany him on horseback. They rode together throughout the sweet-scented woods, where the green boughs touched their shoulders, and the little birds sang among the fresh leaves. She climbed with the prince to the top of the high mountains, and although her tender feet bled so that even her steps were marked, she only laughed and followed him till they could see the clouds beneath them, looking like a flock of birds traveling to distant lands. While at the prince's palace, and when all the household were asleep, she would go and sit on the broad marble steps, for it eased her burning feet to bathe them in cold sea water. And then she thought of all those below in the deep. Once during the night, her sisters came up arm in arm, singing sorrowfully. As they floated on the water, she beckoned to them, and they recognized her, and told her how she grieved them. After that, they came to the same place every night, and once she saw in the distance her old grandmother, who had not been to the surface in the sea for many years, and the old sea king, her father. They stretched out their hands towards her, but they did not venture so near the land as her sisters did. I'm going to stop reading here. One day, the prince and the mermaid were walking outside together, and even though she could not speak, she would hear him talk to her. The prince told her that she meant a lot to him, and how she reminded him of the unknown lady who found him on the beach when he was shipwrecked a while back. And, of course, he never knew it was really her that saved him from drowning. The prince even thought the lady who found him on the beach that day, was one of his acquaintances where the little mermaid placed him at. The prince seemed confused. Later on, the time came, the young prince was told by his royal family that he had to marry, and was introduced to a neighboring kingdom whose king had a beautiful daughter. So, the prince told the little mermaid that he's going to leave and meet this new princess, and it's just a visit, nothing is serious, and she still means a lot to him. So the young mermaid was a little concerned, but accepted his claim of being the one he cared about. So the prince left. Then, eventually, after a long time, the prince came back, and when he did, he was a totally changed person, including his desires. And to make things worse for the young mermaid, he was engaged to the new princess from the neighboring kingdom. The prince was still kind and compassionate to the young mermaid, but his desires had totally changed. The little mermaid kept her composure and accepted the decision of the young prince. But yet, deep down, she was sad and totally devastated that she was going to die and turn into sea foam. Soon afterwards, the prince and the neighboring princess had the wedding on the sailing ship, with the little mermaid attending. She stayed for a short while during a time of dancing and refreshments, but then, being filled with sorrow, she went up by herself to the lower portion of the ship near the water. There she wept bitterly, and as she did, she saw her sisters before her, and their hair was cut short, and they told her, I'm going to read here, "We have given our hair to the witch," said they, her sisters, "to obtain help for you, that you may not die tonight. She hath given us a knife. Here it is, see it is very sharp. Before the sun rises, you must plunge it into the heart of the prince. When the warm blood falls upon your feet, they will grow together again, and form into a fish's tail, and you will become once more a mermaid. You will return to us to live out your 300 years before you die and change into salt, sea foam." Going to stop reading there. So the young mermaid now realized that her sisters had went to the sea witch themselves and struck a new deal by cutting and exchanging their beautiful hair so that she can become a mermaid again. The youngest mermaid took the cursed dagger, and later on, as the wedding was over, the prince and his new bride were sound asleep. The youngest mermaid went into the room and approached the sleeping prince. Then the youngest daughter, the little mermaid, lifted up the dagger that was cursed by the sea witch to take one life in exchange for another above the heart of the prince, and when she was about to thrust it into his chest, she totally stopped herself. She refused and absolutely could not do it, because she still loved the prince, and also she wanted him to be happy as he made her happy. So after stopping herself, she turned and ran out of the room to the water's edge and cast her dagger into the sea. And when the dagger hit the water and sank, very briefly the water around it where it landed turned red. Then, realizing the sun was about to rise in the horizon, the young mermaid went back into the room of the prince to see him for the last time, then turned around, ran back to the water's edge, and dove headfirst into the water. As she hit the water, she felt herself dissolving and expected that she would be absolutely no more, because mermaids and mermen have no souls. Then a strange thing happened. She was still existing and felt herself rising up in the air. Looking down, she saw a skim of sea foam on the water and realized she had dissolved in the sea foam, but for whatever reason, she had a soul and she was still living on. She rose higher and higher above the clouds, above the earth, and even beyond the stars, and eventually saw before her transparent beautiful beings, or spirits. The little mermaid asked these spiritual beings of where she was and what is going on. These spiritual beings told her they were keepers of the air, unseen by mortal eyes, and roam the skies and beyond. They also roam the earth seeking harmony and good deeds by anyone that do them. They also are drawn by love and unity. They also told her because she did an unselfish and loving deed and sacrificed herself instead of the prince, they saw her bravery and how she put others before her during the dark and uncertain times. She gained an eternal soul. The little mermaid, no longer a mermaid, but now part of the spiritual beings of the air, was overjoyed and so much thankful. So she decided to go back to the ship carrying the young prince and his bride to see him for the last time. Seeing both of them trying to locate her after her absence, both looking concerned and sorrowful of the former mermaid disappearance. The new spiritual being of the sky, the little mermaid, could only smile and was happy that the prince found what he wanted, even though he and his bride would never understand what really happened or could see her. Then the new spiritual being went back up to join the rest. Okay, that ends this reading and discussion about the original 1837 story of The Little Mermaid, written by Hans Christian Andersen. Of course, as we read and discussed throughout this video, we saw there are great differences between the book and both Disney movies, the 1989 cartoon and the 2023 live action film. Also, throughout the story, all the characters had no name. Some used more than others, and for the characters used the most, obviously were the Little Mermaid, then her sisters, the young prince, and her grandmother. For the characters not used much, you had the Sea King, followed by the Sea Witch, the neighboring princess, and the spiritual beings of the air. Overall, the story was a good read and very interesting. I'm going to wrap this video up. If you like what you saw, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you won't miss out on my posts. Also share as well. Till then, I'll see you guys in another video, and thank you for watching.